Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? So we'll give it a try. I'll keep talking. If you can't hear me, just let me know. I'm so sorry about that. I think it was actually connected to one of our other Bluetooth speakers because my daughter is actually homesick from school today. So hopefully you can hear me here. If you can, give me a thumbs up. But we'll start from scratch and kind of go through what we're talking about today. So if you haven't been here, perfect. So sorry about that. If you have kids and they're homesick, you know that your devices are like fighting for their life when it comes to bandwidth, and it's 6 season here in Western Colorado. So good morning and happy Friday. Let's try this again. Today we're talking about IT and digital maturity. And why are we talking about that? It's the main thing that we're seeing in the marketplace when it comes to why are we not able to implement or maximize the investment of our technology, and that's really just built around is do you have a technically mature organization. So before we kind of get into our outline, if you can't tell, it's just me today. So this live is always a very informal kind of, I have an outline, I bring it to the table, and you guys can ask your questions. It's not really about what I want to talk about, it's about what you guys want to talk about. So definitely pop those in the questions. Thank you for helping me with the audio in the comments as well. So I appreciate that very, very much. If you haven't been to the Confluential Live, we go live every Friday on LinkedIn. I'm also live on Tuesdays and Thursdays on TikTok. So if you're crossing over from that community, I'm very happy to see you here. Or if you'd like to follow us on TikTok, you can at Kyler Cheatham, and we talk about everything under the sun when it comes to making sure that you can keep your technology ownership, advocating for yourself in these types of bigger technical project, um, those types of different things. So I'll keep going. I hear there's lagging. I hear there's all kinds of things, but we'll do the best we can. That's all we can do. So there's a few reasons that I want to have this conversation today. It's mostly because of this discrepancy around what we're seeing from actual profitability in the marketplace when it comes to technology investment. That's really the issue here. We're spending a ton of money on technology, but we're not actually, right, seeing the benefits from an EBITDA or a profitability standpoint. So just to share some stats with you of like where this is at. And I think this is healthy for everybody to see, like it's not just your organization struggling with it. It's many organizations, right, that just cannot figure out how to operationalize AI. They can figure out how to buy it. I mean, big software is happy to sell it to you, right? Random startups are happy to build you agents, but can you actually utilize them? And no outside third party can help you with that. That comes from good business culture and discipline. So we see, and these stats are all from various Deloitte, McKinsey, they're from Forbes, they're from a variety of CEO Dive, Yahoo Finance, all of these different sources that I pulled them from. If you have a specific stat, right, then let me know. I can drop the source, no problem. So we see high AI users, right around 82% of organizations are using AI, yet only about 39% report EBITDA impact, right? With 2/3 not scaling those operations. Only 31% of enterprise AI use cases have reached full potential in 2025. And I think that's high. I would say, we're closer to probably about 20% of businesses actually seeing impact from their technology investment. And so why is this such a hard thing? And I see some of these questions coming in, and I will get to them when I kind of set the stage. So 81% cite that data silos is a huge barrier, and 35% cite talent, AI skill gap, whether that be not being able to find skills in the marketplace or not having the skills in house and not sure how to teach that, especially with our workforce, spanning 3 generations. We have, well, 4 really. We have boomers, we have Gen X, right? We've got millennials and Gen Z all in the workforce right now that have very different experiences when it comes to leveraging technology to be successful. So, over 50% of IT leaders report AI shortages when it comes to talent, which is a huge spike in the last 2 years. And then they worry about how are they going to make sure that they can actually utilize this in their organization. I talk to organizations every day that have a 30-year-old green screen technology, and somehow their leadership team thinks that they're going to have, twin technology, predictive analytics, all of these different pieces without having the organizational capacity or more the operational capacity to get there. So that's what we're talking about today, from organizational capabilities. And how are you making sure that you're mature enough as an organization to make that happen? So, hopefully, all of our technical difficulties are out of the way here and we can go into some of these questions. So, what does digital maturity actually mean? I think I would equate this to, like, what does digital transformation actually mean? Whatever you want it to mean, right? So, digital maturity, when we go and actually measure it in an organization, right, we're looking at, can you leverage and utilize new technology, whether that be an ERP system, an MES system, agents on your manufacturing floor, AI in your finance and operations. Can you buy something and implement it and have the organization actually utilize it? Do you have the infrastructure, the connectivity, right? The actual foundational core technology, whether again that be your core systems, and then mostly, do you understand your data architecture and are you able to influence it? Do you understand where your data is? That is a big piece of digital maturity. And there comes a lot of shame in this conversation when people are like, oh, I don't know where my data is. I don't know what to do in this. And they think that everybody else has it figured out, which obviously from those stats is certainly not the case, right? So the more you talk about it, the more you're going to get to a point where you can actually create change, right? Give it some air and say, like, we don't have good technical maturity in the organization. That's something that we need to work on, because that's something you have influence over, right? That's not something like a massive multi-million dollar ERP implementation that is going to have different levels of outside vendors. You can influence your technical maturity today without anybody else involved, just you, right? So, let's see. Let's get to some more of these. This one on LinkedIn says, if a plant manager says we want to become more digitally mature, which I don't think any plant manager would ever say, where do you think the conversation would start? I think a plant manager might say, like, how do we get all of these dinosaur systems working together? And that would be becoming more digitally mature, right? Do you have a system architecture team, right? Do you have an architecture mapping that shows how all of these different systems work together to address your pain points? Are you actually building that out, or are you completely outsourcing that to a large, big consulting firm? That would be, the first question in that. I would say also, how much of your staff is comfortable finding information on how to work your systems? I was at the Women in Manufacturing conference not too long ago, and when we say, like, how are you using AI? A lot of people on the manufacturing floor were like, well, we use it to address broken machines, right? Because a technician is going to take 3 days to get out there, and then they're going to, we're going to have to take our time. But when we take a picture and put it in, Copilot or even like a chat GPT situation, we can have the ability to solve that problem and see what the issue is faster. and fix it faster so we have less downtime, right? The fact that your team even knew to do that or knew to try that, right? We have some security issues around that. So stepping aside, right? But they're seeking faster and better ways to do things, which already tells me, right, that you have a more mature IT situation going on, that they know that that's even an option for them. So I think that's a big piece of like, this is not rocket science. It starts with the ability to, does your team even ask those questions of how could we use technology to move faster? And do they feel comfortable telling you, right? Let's see. Yes, there's no, it's almost as if you need someone in the room to ask those quote unquote dumb questions. I have people say all the time in my talks, like, this might be a dumb question. I guarantee you, seven other people in this room have that question, right? And if we don't start asking the quote unquote dumb questions, we're not going back to the basics and creating change in the organization where we actually can affect that maturity. We can't have any ego in these conversations, right? There cannot be a director of IT over there rolling their eyes, being like, well, you know how to do all of this. Well, that's great, Stuart, but then the rest of us don't, and you haven't told anyone how to do it in the organization. So there's, maybe you are mature, but there's some gatekeeping going on that we need to pull down too, right? So let's see. What does digital maturity actually look like in a normal production day? That totally depends. I could give you like a subject A of what that would look like, right? You clock in on an actual machine that shows your hours, and your team knows how to do that, right? They know how to go in and check their hours, and all of these different things. So you're not clocking in on paper. People are forgetting to clock in or they don't know how to clock in. That is a very basic example of a digital mature organization. Do they go over to the shop floor and grab their iPad that they're going to have with them, or their tablet, that they're measuring different levels of how machines are functioning, right? Is there some sort of observation deck where they're going in and they're taking these analytics to see how is this, machine performing today? And is there an agent involved in that that's giving them this data? Where is the data from? How do they know how to check the data, right? To make sure it's right. Is it, that doesn't really sound right. If it is, that's fine too, right? But how are we making sure that they have access to knowing, this looks a little funky. I'm going to check the back end of how this is pulling into all of these different things. Or I'm going to call my counterpart from IT and be able to say, like, this looks a little weird. And they're able to help me go through that troubleshooting, right? And this is why it's so misunderstood, because a lot of people think that IT maturity or technical maturity is like robots going around the manufacturing floor, bringing you coffee, or flying, drones, delivering your mail, right? Like Hogwarts. That's not at all, right? How that works. It's not magic. It's the ability to have that connection throughout the organization. Let's see. All right, let's go into why this is not about tools, right? And I think that that is the biggest piece of this is like, we often like to start with the solution, rightfully so, right? Because you have these billion-dollar technology marketing machines, whether it be on the software side or the big consulting, Deloitte, Accenture side, right? That are trying to convince you that you need like some assessment that is, revolutionary to see if you have IT maturity in your organization, when really that couldn't be further from the truth. There's still an ability to influence that internally. You don't need anyone to help you with that. Bringing in someone, right, that is not going to try and sell you any sort of solution is a good idea, right? Just like you would bring in a technician to fix a certain machine, you might have a third party look at that, but that's not going to be something that you need to do as much as people would want to sell you that. So I think the levels at which I want to give you 5 areas that I would say is a technically mature organization. And that is the ability to translate operational problems into system solutions, right? I have this pain point. This is hard for me. I send out invoices every Wednesday, and that takes all day on Wednesday. Can I automate that with a certain solution? Right? That is a pain point that goes into a problem that could be solved by technology. And then, can we implement this new technology without chaos, right? Without somebody freaking out, whether it be Stu, a director from IT, or Robin from accounting. Can we actually implement these solutions without it being this huge issue? And if it is a huge issue, what is the problem that people think? Do they think AI is going to steal their job? Do they think because invoices are automated that they're not going to be important in accounting anymore? And how do you, as the leadership team, address that? Number 3 is check. How do they check and trust their data? Do they know where the data is coming from? Or are we just blindly trusting, as I call them, trash boards, that are not giving us good information, right? And that's a big piece of this overall puzzle. Do you know where your data is coming from? And are we tracking data in 3 different systems? So, we have Q1 revenue of 2026, accounting reporting one number, sales and marketing reporting another number, production and operations reporting another number. Where is our single source of truth, and how are we protecting that? I'll go into the data maturity in a bit here, so we can really dig into like, what does that actually look like? Because you can have someone come in and cleanse your data for sure. Again, wouldn't recommend it. I think it's kind of like a plastic surgery solution to getting healthy. Can you have some sort of procedure done to make you look better? Right. But if you're still going to eat Cheetos all day long, it's not going to be a healthy decision. And that's very similar to what data maturity needs to look like in the organization. And then, do you know what automation means? And I'm not saying AI, I'm not saying, any sort of predictive AI agents, like just hold the phone on that. Do you know what automation means? Do you know that these are manual tasks in the organizations? I send invoices on Wednesday, period. Right? And so those are going to send automatically. Nothing else is going to happen in that situation. That's how we know that you're ready for some sort of technical maturity, is when you grasp the sense that a machine is now going to do this very manual task, right? And then, can you scale the technology? And this is a big one, right? So we did an AI pilot in production. Can we move that AI system over to finance, right? And that is, again, a big question of like, are you able to move, or do you just have one area of the organization that is technically mature? And then the other one is still, writing hand note clocked in, being like, sorry, I messed up this timesheet. Love you so much, Jim from production, right? Like, are we still doing that? And how do we make sure that it's across and not just in that? And I'll talk about data, I promise you guys. So I just want to, give you a lens of who could still be. An immature organization still might have a BI system, business intelligence dashboards. It might have a cloud infrastructure. It might have an ERP system, and it might have automation tools, but it struggles with basic things, reporting disputes, like I just said. So we're recording something like revenue 3 different ways. And then we still have these manual processes. We still send invoices on Wednesdays. We have very broken integrations. That's a big piece, right? Everybody wants to get integration happy, especially when they're going to sell you new software. They're like, oh, yeah, this definitely integrates with Salesforce. I mean, yeah, if you build a whole custom API, that's great, but that's very difficult to manage, right? Then the last one I would say is they still struggle with expensive systems, right? They have zero idea and financial discipline on what they're spending on these systems. And they might even have systems that they're not even using. This is where we talk about capability meets discipline. So those are really the big outline. And then I have levels. So there's 3 levels of IT maturity. I call it the pyramid, right? We have the technology infrastructure, that's layer one. What do we have for technical systems? And then layer two is the data and process discipline, which I see you guys asking about. So we'll get into that first. And then layer three at the top is organizational intelligence, right? So that's where the AI comes in this small, tiny triangle at the top of the pyramid. Those are advanced capabilities, right? But we still are very much seeing from the stats I laid out at the beginning that we've still got a ton of work to do in the technical infrastructure. So let's talk about data, right? And that maturity gap, because I think that's a big misunderstanding of that. And data ownership is a huge piece of that. So let's tackle some of these. Who is in charge of knowing where the data is coming from? So that is the data owner, right? So how do we know when we have data scattered all over across SaaS systems, across vendor platforms, across disconnected databases, and then inconsistent structures? Like it might look like something in one system and then something completely different in another system. We cannot build anything on top of that. And that is a huge issue, right? So when we have, where does this data come from? That's going to come from the processes. And that's why I put data and process discipline in the same one. So do you have consistent data definitions? Is everybody speaking the same language when they're talking about something? And I just want to be so clear is when you go through these data infrastructure discipline type of initiatives, it's painful, right? Anyone that tells you it's easy is a liar and they're trying to sell you something, right? Do you have to like drag a negative attitude from it? No, right? Right? Just like changing your diet, if you eat Cheetos every day, is painful, right? I love Cheetos. I want to eat Cheetos, but I know it's not good for my health. Just like the data is not good for your organization when it's not in a healthy manner. So you got to kind of pull up a level, right? Of who owns the system, right? Is that a solution architect that owns that system? Who's in charge of that? And then who is going to be the data steward, right? Who's going to go in there every day and make sure the data is looking good, acting good, right? That we're able to see any sort of anomalies, all kinds of things. And do you understand how to spot something that looks weird, right? We see something, say something, right? Is there a problem in this or it just looks a bit funky? Who do you go to with that? Who is in charge of that from your system architecture team that is that data owner? That's really going to start with that layer of the organization. And then we're going to go down into, okay, who actually inputs data here? Is this a frontline point of sale system where we need to really reignite the understanding with the frontlines team? Is this a financial system where we need to just focus on accounting, right? We're taking it in micro bite-sized areas of the organization to make sure that we're able to be able to make this change impactful. The biggest issue here is when we have them not trusting the data, right? And so we need these like manual reconciliations. And that is a huge issue with just perception. People think they can't trust the technology. So why would they use it, right? So you're going to have to come up, use your marketing team, as I say, come up with a data internal marketing campaign where you show what happens when you don't take data input seriously. So, and where does that spreadsheet chaos come in? So let's see. I'm pulling some questions here. These are such good questions. How should maintenance data influence production planning and reliable decisions? Well, the first question, right, is your maintenance data correct? And what type of maintenance data? Are you a technically mature organization that maybe has sensors on your machine and we're doing some sort of predictive maintenance? Or are we still, which is not a bad thing, in that era where we need a production manager or a shop floor manager that has been there for 30 years that can kind of hear the hum of this machine and be like, yeah, we got to kick it on its left side so that it sets up again, right? So that's what we're trying to take that data set that is that production manager that's been there for 30 years and operationalize it. But it's only going to work if people trust the data, right? So, how should predictive maintenance or maintenance data influence production planning and reliability decisions? Ideally, it would be the sensor based technology on the machine that's able to pull into a dashboard and show you the predictive maintenance of this machine. Oil needs to be changed every 3 months. Such and such part needs to be changed on this date so that we're not risking our $40 million dump truck that we're driving down in a mine breaking, right? If that dump truck breaks, I can guarantee you that there's going to take a long time to fix it, because there's only certain numbers of mechanics that can come out and take on something like that, right? Especially if you're in a very remote production because you're doing things like mining, right? So that's kind of the making the reliability of the decision, but that takes a strong infrastructure, right? Let's see. How can a company tell us if its production data is trustworthy? Remember in like third grade math when you had to check your work, right? You need to be able to check your work in these types of conversations, right? You need a different type of scenario or catch all strategy that makes sure that we're flagging any inconsistencies. And you can even use agents to do that too. Like, why isn't this happening? And you should not blindly trust the technology. So that is a piece of like, you got to be able to get in there in the back end and see what is it pulling in and why, especially if it's looking weird, right? Let's see. What are the risks of, sorry, I lost the question. What is the, no, sorry. I wish I could see this on the screen like you guys do. What is the risk of relying too heavily on manual data entry? Time, right? Human error is a big thing about that. A lot of our agents that we implement, their goal, right, is to, as I always say, have the human operator relax a little, right? So if that variance for one of these different agents is too high, will it reset itself, or would it be a human operator that's going to come in, shut down the production line, try and fix something that actually doesn't need it to be fixed, right? There's going to be variances in all types of different time, temperature, all of these different things. We just have to know in that variance, is it something that needs to be fixed so it's overshooting each time, right? Or is it something that we absolutely need to be able to just let kind of happen and relax a minute before it fixes itself? That when we have manual data, we don't have the ability and wherewithal of the system to check that, and that's going to be a big just time suck for us, right? It's a huge inefficiency, and hopefully by decreasing that inefficiency, you'll be able to mine funds out of the organization to pay for that new technology, right? Let's see. Let's see. Why is it so difficult for manufacturing systems to share reliable data across planning, production, maintenance, and inventory? Because people put in the data differently, right? Because there is no data hygiene in the organization. So someone from production likes to see the data this way, and someone from maintenance likes to see the data this way, and someone from inventory prefers to see the data this way. So it's going to take a unified strategy to get everyone marching in the same direction. But at least they have data, right? Like, at least we're not guessing in all of these different things. But there needs to be some sort of organizational process that we bring in for data maturity. And that's a big piece of this, right? So Let's see. That's a big no. It's not easy to get everyone on the same page to what each terminology means. And how do you train the new people on the terminology, right? Because they might be coming from another organization where they called it something different. So we need, do you have a data dictionary? Like, do all of these things documented, or is just in your culture that like this is how you talk about certain things? I mean, especially in our industry, who's ever walked into a meeting and been like, there's 4,000 acronyms in here, and I don't even know what we're talking about at this point. Even though I've been in this industry, I've worked for a similar company before, but I still don't know what we're talking about, right? Because each organization is a different culture and speaks its own language, especially when it comes to data. So how do we, lift the veil on that? Especially if we have people that are doing some data gatekeeping, right? They want to be valuable to the organization. So they're pulling these things into tribal knowledge. And we need to be able to excavate those from the person because God forbid they leave the organization. We hope that they don't, right? But someday, someone's going to leave your technical team that did all of this code for an ERP system that's 30 years old that nobody really knows what that does, right? So they don't want to change it because it might break the system. So they're like slowly layering things over it, yet they have no idea what it's actually built on, right? And that is a huge risk for the organization for sure, right? So let's go into kind of the AI reality check of this because you have a lot of great questions about data. And I love that because what it shows me, right? And I've seen a lot of this in 2026 conversations is people are like looking under the AI, which I think last year they weren't doing, right? Everybody wanted AI and we were all investing in AI. And our strategy for 2026 was AI. And it's like, okay, well, that's not a strategy. That's a sentence, right? And a dumb one if we're talking about dumb things, right? And we need to look at what does the AI stand upon? And AI reveals that maturity so quickly, especially if you spent a ton of money on it. Because organizations with structured data, like we just talked about, they have the discipline and they take it seriously. They understand why this is so critical, right? They have operational discipline and accountability, and they have integrated systems, not systems they integrated one time, right? But integrations that they manage, right? That AI will accelerate productivity very quickly, right? That will be successful in an organization like that. Does that mean they can just turn it on like the AI vendors would like you to believe? We just plug this in and it revolutionizes your system. Does it do that? Absolutely not, right? You can ask ChatGPT a question and it's dead wrong with confidence, right? And so those are the types of things that we still have to have some sort of quality assurance around. Um, Organizations without those core functions when it comes to AI are going to be having unreliable outputs, right? They're going to be having all of these different things. Like we said, somewhere one dashboard says this, and then one dashboard says this, and one dashboard says this. And it's like, what's actually right? They're going to have confusing results, especially for their front lines, where their executive team just like dropped this AI, be like, I bought this on a golf course at a conference, and here, you use it. You're welcome, frontline staff. And the frontline staff is like, all right, well, I mean, I'm going to have to change the whole way I do my job for this, but no big deal. And then they're getting all these confusing results, and ultimately they're going to leave because their job is now confusing to them and they have no idea how to work this. They're a forklift driver, not an AI engineer, and you've now made their job so hard and cumbersome and they don't understand what to do. So not only are they slower at it, but they don't like it anymore, right? And then you're going to get low trust in these AI recommendations. Who's been on a shop floor where, you have talked to the executive team, they're like, yes, they love this, MES system and this new RPA that we put in, they're absolutely love it. And then you're like, okay, well, we'll see about that. And you actually get down there and start talking to people and they're like, oh no, we don't use that. We haven't used that for like 3 years because it doesn't do function X, Y, and Z that we need to be able to get product out the door. So we just use this spreadsheet over here. Happens all the time. Every single day that happens. So here we are, the organization is spending a ton of money on this revolutionary system that doesn't meet the needs of their front line. So now the front line, anytime you talk about implementing AI, they're going to be like, I don't really know what that means, nor do I really care. I need to be able to do my job. And then we're going to see, of course, the minimal operational impact. We are not going to see the money from our technical investment. And that's the biggest piece of this conversation is there should be a bold, straight, fat line from whatever you implement to the money it's saving you or the money that it's making you. Because at the end of the day, right, this isn't going to be something that you can just justify the spend for if it's not making an impact in your organization. So yeah, documentation. I mean, I would rather have too much than too little. So I would say if you're create good habits around technical maturity, no, right? I think there's things that waste time, but try documenting everything and then pull back on what needs to be documented after that, right? But I would rather see a culture that's very, very used to documentation as opposed to one, again, that just goes around and says things. There is always analysis paralysis when we have too much. Like, are we analyzing this? Or are we doing something with it? Right? There's always a lot of that, especially with if you're working in big tech or big consulting. Those hours going into, well, it took me 8 hours to analyze the system. It's like, okay, well, why? Right? So I would say if you're using a billable resource for that, absolutely there can be. But there's a balance on that. If you have specific questions on it, definitely feel free to shoot me a DM and we can kind of dive into what that means together. It's going back to the basics. What does this specific AI mean? Remember, if you were live with me on TikTok, we went through the 4 different types of AI agents, automation agents, right? Where it's just one manual task, prediction agents that's using historical data from the organization to make decisions, Gen AI agents, right? And full autonomous agents that are making full decisions without humans. Gen AI agents are, ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot that are answering questions using data throughout the organization. You got to know what that means and where you need your specific AI, not where your vendor told you needed it, but where you need it, right? Let's see. What's one operational discipline that would dramatically improve data reliability? Well, I think we have to talk about like the biggest gap here before we go into operational discipline, which is, do you own your technology strategy? And that's a big piece of this that we don't really have influence on, right? If we're in a SaaS contract and we've given the keys of our organization over to a big vendor, then we're going to have a problem, right? We're going to have a problem with this type of thing, and we're going to have to slowly pull back the ownership we have influence over, but those contracts have been executed, right? So when we look at the issue of giving away your operational discipline, that's going to look like something of like you can't export your data. And we see this a lot right now with SAP clients, specifically if they're trying to plug something into their new S4 system or something like that. There's data blocked, right? There's certain access where they don't have the ability to access the data when they need to access it, even though they think like that's wild because that's our data. You go back to a bigger vendor and they're like, no, that's our data, right? It's in our platform. So you need to be able to know what ability you have to access your operational data and how that works. And that's really going to unveil what you have the ability for operational discipline. But even asking those questions is a huge improvement. So when problems start to occur, you rely too much on vendors and you can't troubleshoot effectively because you don't have access to those systems that manage these types of things. You might have a dashboard, you may have some visibility in it, and you struggle to evolve your system because they belong to somebody else. Now, we always know that the cloud is using somebody else's computer, right? Whether it be a vendor or managed service provider, whatever, right? Sometimes that's unavoidable, but you've got to understand what your risks profile are of, again, not running your own technical operations. So that would be the biggest piece of that. And then I would say the other thing, that if I gave like one piece of operational discipline, what does your, what I call the devil's triangle, look like? And that triangle, right, is operations, leadership, and IT. Are those all moving in one direction, or is there some funkiness, some fighting, some messiness, right? In that, a technology mature organization cannot function without a healthy devil's triangle. Is it going to be a perfectly, symmetrical triangle all the time? Absolutely not, right? It's going to be something that you're going to have ebbs and flows, but there has to be an alignment, especially if you're doing a bigger technology spend, a bigger implementation. So, definitely a good question though when it goes through that. Um, and I just want you guys to know and read those contracts, because platform roles can change, right? Capabilities can change, pricing can change. Those are all big things that you need to be able to look at your contract and say, hey, this is something that we need to know. We just had a client the other day where a vendor was trying to say something crazy like, hey, we need to increase your maintenance fees 40% year over year. And the client was like, that sounds like a lot, right? And we were over here like, no, that's I don't know what, is happening over there, but that's not what's happening over here. So you have to like resurrect those agreements from like the bowels of your conversation, of your organization, and read every line of that contract. Again, it's very painful. Have your lawyers do it. They love that stuff. But either way, right? We looked at the contract, we dissected it, we did a forensic analysis of it, and saw that they contractually cannot increase your fees year over year. But like the audacity of some of these software vendors to just say things like that, right? It shows you the industry that which we work in is still a wild west of taking away businesses' ownership. And that's really what, my platform is all about, is that advocacy of you have the ability to control your own technology strategy, not someone else. But if you use a SaaS system, you are renting space, right? So you've got to know there's only so much things you can do in your rental apartment. You can't paint it purple. Okay, you can, but then, you're going to have to paint it back, type of thing. I mean, at least in any rental I've been in. So, who will go over those risks with you? Nobody. I would say, with this question, who will go over these risks with you if a vendor doesn't? They never will, right? Because why would that be in their best interest, right? A vendor's job is to sell you software, right? Does that mean they're horrible, terrible people? Absolutely not. It means you need to be responsible for what you buy, right? So if you don't understand the risks, right, find someone, that a consultant, a firm, a partner, an advocate in software buying, a lawyer, right, a SaaS software lawyer that really understands what that means. I think being part of this conversation where, is a big piece of that. But nobody's going to go over these risks with you. That's on you to figure out what they are. And in these situations, right, I can give you like industry risks that I see, but only you are going to understand what your specific biggest risk profile and what you're willing to accept from that. Not to mention the edge cases that you're going to need to really look at. What could happen if we hate our system in a year? Do we have an exit ramp in this contract? Do we understand how to get off of it, right? And that's going to be a big conversation when it comes to looking at those agreements. If you don't have one now, when is the annual agreement? When are they going to, hunt you down to sign their new updated agreement? And then maybe you have negotiation levels there, but you're not going to know until you ask, right? So if you do have specific questions, definitely DM me and we can go through what that looks like. I think the things I really want you to be able to take away from this conversation is you can build a technically mature environment, but it needs to be like an intentional initiative around this. And you need to stop, especially the leadership team, all this like, we are the company of the future. Like maybe you can be that. But today it's about how do we be our best so that we can operationally implement anything we want. We can buy anything we want and know that as a culture, we have the ability to implement it within our hallways, right? Whether it be kind of a back end or front end system, or it be AI agents because your board is pushing you for that. That's where the capability really comes into play. Um, is really building out that, and I think I was just at a conference where Deloitte was presenting on the spends around hyperscalers, which I think is something crazy, like 600 billion, that they're spending this year on building out that architecture. That's cool, right? It's always cool to see innovation for different companies, but what does that actually mean for you and your business, right? You and your AWS platform. Like what does that actually mean? Right? Because AWS does go down, right? And bigger businesses can lose billions of dollars on that. But it's not something that you need to be like beholden to somebody else's downtime. There's definitely things you can do as a technically mature organization to make sure that that risk isn't as high for you, right? And so that all comes down to governance, structure, and making sure that you have the ability to do that. And so, things I want you to be able to take away from this conversation is start to analyze, get curious about that in your organization. Where is your data? Right? And I only laugh because people want to skip that step. Start with the data and follow the breadcrumbs. Where's your data? Go to your IT team, go to your operations team, and start asking, like, where does this system get this data from? And where does this system get this data from? Is it the same area? Is it the same source? How do you know that the data is going in there right? How do you ensure that have those capabilities for your frontline staff to do that with a B? Yeah, I know. It's like, I think we're making up numbers at this point. Like, that's so much money. Like, what does that even mean? Yeah, hyperscalers. Let me see if I can find it. I had the stat right up here because I wanted to share it with you. So let me see if I can pull it up while we kind of close out here. Let's see. So hyperscale, it's not 600. I'm sorry. It's 400 billion. My bad. My bad on that. In 2025, which is up 44%. And so it's saying that broader AI investments are up 40%. And I saw this at the Women in Manufacturing Summit when Deloitte presented on that. So when we're looking at that, we're talking about growth drivers. And a lot of what Deloitte is talking about is data centers, right? Because everybody wants to be involved in data centers at this point because, it's a license to print money. And so data centers, I had, a friend ask me the other day, I heard AI uses a lot of water. We're in Colorado. Water is a big thing for us from a legislative standpoint. But does AI use a lot of water? Well, no, but the data centers that run it do, right? They use a lot of water. They use a lot of power. The cooling structures, HVACs, of data centers is fascinating if you have time to go down an internet rabbit hole, but only, again, those technically mature organizations are going to be able to access this type of funds that the hyperscalers are putting into, whether it's infrastructure data centers, right, like physical infrastructure, or if it's more cloud infrastructure, right, which all goes together. You want to be able to benefit from that spend. But you can only do that if you understand your own cloud infrastructure, right? Like if your executive team doesn't think that your data is actually in a literal cloud, right? Which some do. And again, you gotta drop the ego on that conversation. Who cares if they think it's a literal cloud? We have the opportunity to educate that structure of the organization and make sure that they're understanding, like, what is a data environment? I mean, do an animation around that. This is our data environment. Send it around to everybody so they can actually look. What is our integration architecture around this? Map those out so people can see them. Don't gatekeep it, right? There's no reason that people aren't allowed to see kind of how data flows through the organization. I say the same thing with cybersecurity, right? Like, nobody wants to talk about cybersecurity risk because it's scary, right? But you've got to be able to explain to your frontline staff how cybersecurity or hacks work, right? Because if you get an email from me, a partner at the organization, and be like, hey, I need, 50 Nordstrom gift cards right now, right? I would hope that our employees on the front line are like, huh, that's kind of weird. Connor's never asked me for 50 Nordstrom gift cards before, right? Or text me from a random number. That seems like there's nefarious action there. I need to let someone know. Um, there's so much emphasis on data centers, but what about the memory and data transfers? Honestly, don't even know anything about that. So school us on it, right? Tell us what we should be looking at. But data centers is certainly a huge piece that the bigger system integrators want a piece of because they're so profitable, right? Which makes sense. So I think the grids are really a big, like the power grids, like how much can they handle, especially in rural areas where they want to build data centers. Like I think I saw some commercial, maybe it was at the Super Bowl or something like that, where you see this ad against data centers in these like beautiful farmlands in Iowa that are now going to be taken over by these villainous data centers, and how could they do that? And so there's definitely a misconception around that. If you're going to build a data center, you've got to give a lot to the local economy, right? Like you've got to get jobs, but then there's also a stress on the power grid. So a lot of these rural power grids, they can't sustain something like that as they are. So that really has to be a conversation with the community as well. So it's interesting. Um, and power demands, as they said, will go up by 30 times in 2035, which is incredible to me. The amount of power these types of systems need, probably for memory and data transfers, right? So the homeland, yeah, right. So I think that piece of it is a big reason why you start today of building a technically mature organization, because the technology is not going away. We know that for sure. But we've got to keep it safe, and we got to keep it scalable, and we most importantly have to keep our ownership on our terms, right? We cannot outsource ownership of our core technologies to someone else. Might be you be using a platform for sure, right? We're not going to probably build our own homegrown ERP system. If you have those internal capabilities in place and you can integrate that with the different systems you need, good for you, right? That is not the norm, right? We're going to purchase an IFS, an Infor, an Epicor, and we're going to probably utilize those to understand what we have power over in those decisions. But we're first going to negotiate the contract. And if we didn't negotiate the contract, we're going to go find the contract, right, to negotiate. And so that's a big piece of this in our overall conversation. So I think that's a good place to end for today. If you have any additional questions about like your specific architecture, as I always say, the technology of the organization is as unique as your own human DNA, right? And that's why it drives me crazy when I see people, being like, "Oh, we did this for this industry." I mean, industry experience is great, but my organization deserves its own unique strategy that's going to be specific to my goals and my people, right? Because you might have done that in industry with a very technically mature organization, but we need help just on our data architecture. Like, what are we dealing with here? And where do we go from here? And I think that's the biggest piece of like, do we need a new system? Do we have enough in our old system? Do we need agents to help us with something? So hard to figure that out, but you want to be able to at least have that choice in making sure that your organization is good enough to get there. So if you don't join my lives on TikTok, I'd love to see you over there. I appreciate you joining me on YouTube and LinkedIn today. I'll be back live, probably with Adam. Not sure, depending on client travel, next Friday. So we'll be excited to see you then. If again you have any specific questions, just shoot me a DM, and usually we can figure it out in there. We can always jump on a call, but we don't have to, right? We can just have those conversations. A lot of people, especially on my TikTok lives, often reach out and just be like, "Hey, I just want to like gut check this with you because it sounds weird of what my system integrator is telling me about blah 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 blah, and I can say, yeah, that sounds really weird to me. Here's where I would dig in and ask questions. And then also, um sorry, my 5-year-old has the plates from our stove right in front of our desk. Never a dull moment on over here. So, oh, it's a waffle iron plates. So never mind. We're don't call CPS on us over here. But anyway, and I think here, I'll do this last one. If I'm a business owner planning to invest in digital systems for production, tracking, and maintenance, how should I realistically evaluate whether the investment is pay off? What metrics should I look at? I mean, I think you need to first sit down and like, what are you trying to solve for your digital systems? Is that like, so if you want production tracking and maintenance, do you need something like smaller Sage system that's going to help you? Acumatica would be something to look at. How much revenue are we talking about, and how much inventory are we talking about? To know if it's paid off, you should see that value within weeks, right? Not even from like a nominal standpoint, but you should see it from an organizational standpoint, for sure. So that is looking at something like, what's my throughput? What's my supplier timeline? What's something that I have reduced downtime over the last month when it comes to these types of predictive maintenance. But definitely DM me if you have questions about that. I've got to jump to another call now, but I will see you guys next Friday. Thank you so much for the great questions.